Hi everyone, and welcome to Unmuted by Big Karma. Unmuted is this podcast in which we dive into all the secret sauce of all entertainment industries, how the stuff we love is made, and Big Karma itself produces video games starring kick-ass action heroes who leverage their disability to win. You can find out more about that on patreon.com/Big Karma. My great guest today is Sacha Thompson, founder of the Equity Equation, great leader in diversity and inclusion, which will be the key topic we will talk about today. And was definitely, it's close to her heart, it's close to hers. She used to be at Amazon Web Service working in diversity and inclusion. And without further ado, welcome, Sasha. Hi, Sasha. Welcome
Hi,
to the show.
Pascal. How are you?
Thank you for being with me. Always such a pleasure to talk to you. How have you been
Thank you
today?
for having me. I'm wonderful. I'm wonderful. I'm not ready for the seasons to change, but it is what it is. It's getting cold, so I'm getting prepared for that.
Where are you talking us from? Because some people don't have seasons, you know.
Oh, that's true. So I am calling from the East Coast. I am right outside of Washington, D.C.
Oh, close to the West Wing and the power.
Yes, I'm about 8 miles from there.
All right, and you have real seasons over there, unlike the West Coast.
We have something of seasons. Yeah. Yeah.
All
Right now
right,
we're in this pseudo summer fall thing. So I don't know what it is.
all right. Obviously, the elephant in the middle of the room and the key topic of the day will be what most people refer to as diversity and inclusion. Uh, Going wider, we can call it representation, access, leveling the play field. Before we go into that, let's go back in time. Obviously, you didn't start in diversity and inclusion. This is something that grows onto somebody. So, what were you doing before? And maybe more importantly, what led you to think, oh, there is a problem here and it's on me to take it on?
That's an interesting question because I think I always had some aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion in my world. And I'll say it that way. Um, because I was a sociology major. I focused on cultural diversity and ethnicity in college. Since then, every job that I had touched diversity and inclusion in some way. So if it wasn't called diversity and inclusion at the time. So it was, outreach development or program development or, serving underrepresented communities in some way. And so since college, that has been part of who I am, part of my job. When I think about why I even went into sociology, it's because I grew up in Virginia. My family's from the Caribbean. I was always an other. I was always one of the only. Um, I did ballet for most of my life, and so I was always the only Black ballerina, or one of a very few. So I've always had the sense of being the other or the only or not necessarily fitting in. Um, and I was okay with that. I was comfortable with that. But as I got older, I wanted to understand the why behind that. And so sociology, I actually went into college as a business major, business and accounting, because again, that's a safe job. You always get a job in accounting. And I took my first accounting class and I was like, this ain't it. This is not for me. But I loved sociology because I was understanding people and cultures and why communities came together in ways around such commonalities, right? What was it that made a Latinx community Latinx, right? Even though it wasn't called that back in the day.
It was
Um,
Latino because it was a macho-headed world.
right, right, exactly. And so I was very curious about just different cultures and learning and growing and understanding even the history of them. And so fast forward in my career when I was doing outreach programs, people couldn't understand why I was connecting so well with some of the communities. And I'm like, well, you have to understand what's important to them in order to provide them services that they need. You can't just give them what you think they need. And so that became almost one of my, what I became known for, right? Oh, Sacha has her pulse, her finger on the pulse of the community. Well, it wasn't that I had my finger on the pulse. It was I took the time to understand what was important to them. And so I just carried that out throughout my career. And even now, as a consultant and, as a coach in this space, anyone that works with me, they know they're going to get the question of, so what are you doing to impact the most marginalized? Like, you're doing all this stuff, which is great, but how is it really impacting the people that are most affected by these decisions? And that's where I start to get blank stares or, but we're doing it. Okay, but what are you doing? Where's the accountability? What does change look like? How are you changing systems? And so, yeah, it's just been one of kind of the love me or hate me kind of things about me, right? I've gotten into a lot of trouble for asking those questions too.
What kind of trouble?
Oh, goodness. I have been labeled an upset employee. I've been labeled a troublemaker. I've been told that I did not think like a leader, and so therefore would never be promoted because I was not, I didn't have the same viewpoint as leadership, which ironically, I'm like, but this is about diversity. Isn't it about diversity of ideas and thoughts and experiences? Right. But because
at the time, leadership was much differently perceived as well.
Yeah.
Because the world was less global. It was globalizing, but
Yeah.
America was thinking like America. France was thinking like France. Everybody was in his little fragmented bubble with its old cultural. And as they grew into appeal to the global consumer, first they found growth in China or here or there. And it was kind of growth by opening borders, and it was easy. But then, the nature of competition, at some point you reach some saturation of the easy stuff. And then they realize how, but the global consumer might not necessarily think like Mike, 52 years old, white,
Exactly.
guy, wearing a suit since he's 17. And, and that's where I think there has been improvement, significant improvement. And obviously there is always room for more. But your discourse, I would submit, is much more aligned with the new style of leadership, which is we cannot just fit with one category.
The status quo,
we have
right.
to expand. Yeah, status quo is a word I keep using a lot the last year. Because especially when facing idealist people who tell me, but this is not perfect. I'm sure you face that too. This is not perfect. No, it's not. But we're not comparing this measure against idealism. We're comparing this measure against the status quo.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it better than the status quo? And
exactly.
that word has become a bit of a trick.
Exactly. Yeah. My mom told me not too long ago, she was like, well, maybe you were just born ahead of your time. Like maybe because now I'm getting calls from folks that I used to work with that, are saying, oh my gosh, I absolutely love, the work that you're doing and what you're putting out there. And I'm like, really? Because when I was saying the same thing 10, 15 years ago, I was a troublemaker. Right. So I haven't changed. The world has changed. And I think that that's kind of where we need to go is how do we have this global mindset of what professionalism looks like, what work looks like, what flexibility even looks like. And so I'm hoping that these changes that we're seeing is a movement and not just a moment. Like I want to see them continue, right, to grow and evolve as we continue to learn versus this is the moment we need to check a couple of boxes to say, yes, we're doing what we're supposed to do. And once it dies down, we go back to the status quo.
Have you seen that over the last couple of decades? Moments that gave great hopes and then died out and didn't become the movement it could have become?
I think we see that in spurts, right? And it's hard to say over time what that looks like. So, for example, in the U.S., around civil rights and affirmative action, it could have been so much more than it was. But I think because there are so many sensitivities around who's getting excluded or perceived to be excluded, that there's this sugaring down or watering down of, okay, well, we're not going to focus on this group. We're going to focus on everyone because everyone needs to be included. I'm like, well, that's counterproductive to what this program is supposed to be. Right. And I think that there's this sense of that has happened over the last few years, that in the last 2 years, you're starting to see more shift toward, no, we really need to be focused. Right now, it's particularly on Black and Brown and, employees, and some of the work around women has kind of died off, and some of the work around disability has kind of died off. And so how do we multitask? Like we multitask in every other aspect of business, but for some reason folks can't multitask in this space. And so I'm hoping that with the momentum of the last 18 months to 2 years, that it doesn't fall off and say, okay, we're good right now until there's another murder or until there's another incident, that we learn from, okay, we can't just check this box. What's that deep dive that we need to do in this space? And how do we do that for a majority of the communities that somebody's impacted by, right? And I think that there is a way to do that, but it has to be intentional, and it has to be led by leadership. It has to come from the top down.
And like you said, it has to be granular as
Yeah.
well. As a marketing guy, this resonates with me. If I face somebody who tells me my audience is E for everyone, I will tell him, okay, this is a very ambitious statement, and I need to break it down for you in two things. One is, why are you going to, how much are you going to invest, and what is going to be your differentiated message for the under 13? What is it going to be for the teenagers? What is it going to be for mom and dad? And how do you reconcile them as a family?
Yep.
Because that's going to take you years. And then if you want to be global, then that's an aggregation of local. So prepare to have culturally adapted, empathic message in all these countries and put some dollars. So either you tell me where you choose, or you have to tell me, what do you have for the skateboarding community? What do you have
Exactly.
for the hippies? What do you have for the Afro-Brazilians? What do you have? And how do you reconcile it? Otherwise, pick who your audience is and on which side you are. And that's
Right.
where E for everyone can become dangerous. Because how can you, for example, if you take Colin Kaepernick, an iconic example of the last few years, when Nike signs him as a billboard ambassador, they make the choice. You cannot make equally happy the supporters of Colin Kaepernick and the guy shouting and screaming and spitting at his TV when he kneels to the anthem. There is too much of a gap between those, and you have to make your choice and go with your message. So I agree with you that it's granular, and especially from my point of view, because you know that for me, representation started mostly with disability and
Yep.
seeing that problem. But you and I talked before how this connects together, because all minorities at the end of the day want more access and want more fairness. So they have something in common. And that's why sometimes it's sad when they compete about who's the most excluded, because they actually have more in common together against the majority and the conservative forces. But as a company, to go back to the corporate world, it's not that you can suddenly slap a DNI action that you've done and then that's it, now you can please everyone. No, it's, you need to be more accessible, for example, by disabled people. Oh, this means you need more settings, more features, and more thinking through about the deaf community, the blind community, the spectrums and cursors within those communities, because not everybody is blind equally, as you find out when you follow Paralympic. But this is also true for ethnicities and for religious backgrounds and for sexual identities. It's not boxes and categories. It's cursors on the spectrums and real combinations
and overlaps and intersections. Yeah. I mean, and that's it. You know, I love the analogy of E for everyone, because for so long that E stood for the majority, right? It was anyone that was on the,
you have in front of me, E for everyone. That's the
right. It was just, it was anyone on the margins did not really matter, as long as you know, you met that majority, that was everyone, right? Per se. And it's exactly what you were talking about, right? What about these communities? How do you reach them? And if you don't, then is it really E for everyone? Or is it for a subset of your ideal customer?
For mainstream.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. You know, and so as you were talking, it just reminded me of the situation that made me leave corporate America. Like I was dealing with some issues, but that aha moment was I was on a committee to put together an inclusion website, right? All the stuff with George Floyd had happened, and they wanted to put a website, an inclusion website up to talk about all the wonderful, great things that, you know, the company was doing around inclusion. Already in my head, I was like, there's nothing that's going on this website because y'all ain't doing nothing. But
getting images of Black people smiling.
Right. It was just all of this stuff that they, you know, were trying to put together on this website. And I asked the question, is the website going to be screen reader accessible? And the response was, oh, we're not concerned with that. We just need to get this out. So I'm like, how are you going to have a website about inclusion, but the accessibility of that website is not important? And that was the moment where I was just like, I can't do this anymore. Like I knew that the work that I have been doing in this space around just diversity and making sure, you know, I'm looking at it from all angles, and not that I'm an expert in all angles, but I at least know who's not being represented in the space. And so when I bring that up and I'm told that that's not important, that tells me that this isn't really important to you, right? This is more about PR and making you look good.
Crisis management.
Exactly. Than actually fixing the problem or creating a solution that truly
starting a pathway to the solution of the problem. Just even showing initiative at the very least, not dismissing it as not my problem.
Not a concern. Right. So,
but I gotta tell you, I myself have had a few moments of shame in the last 2 years, now that I really made it a professional endeavor and not just a private one to care about disability inclusion. I had my moments where I was like, oh my God, that's what the alt tags are for. 23 years on the internet, doing HTML websites when I was 19. doing blog and product pages for Lexan by the hundreds a week when I was 24, and very lazy about the alt tags because I had no idea what they were for. And I was wondering even why the internet had them. And then when somebody told me, but that's for the blind,
Yeah.
I started looking back. And now I really think through my alt tags so much about, all right, what do they really need to see? What is important that is read to them, and even to the point of the punctuation. Because if you put a lot of smileys or punctuation or slash, this is all read out loud in the alt tag. And so you also have to. So yeah, I care about it a lot now, but that's out of shame and guilt for having cared so little about it for 20 years that I feel I have to overdo it now.
Yeah, and and that's a great example because it's an area I'm conscious of, but I don't always do, right? And so then when I catch myself, I'm like, okay, let me go back and do it, but I don't always catch myself. And so it's just having, what do I need to do to remind myself? So I think it was yesterday, I started putting like these Post-it notes on just things that I need to be conscious and aware of. Like, hey, alt tags, got it, right? Like I need to just be conscious of those types of things in this work if I want to be authentic. But and also, I can't preach to someone if I'm not doing it myself,
Yep.
right? I can't tell leaders this is important if I'm not doing it myself. And so,
That's very deep in parenting as well. Somebody was telling me the other day, my children spend time on their phones all the time and they're not reading books, although I tell them to read books. And I told that person, first of all, you're on your phone all the time. So they're just mimicking daddy and mommy.
yep.
You don't let go of your phone around the dinner table, so why would they?
Why would they? Right.
Second, how many times do they see you read books? If you want your child to read a book, don't tell him to read a book. Sit down and read a book next to him for 30 minutes every day. By day 5, he's deep down, we are all monkeys and apes. We are aping each other. So if daddy and mommy read a book at 6 p.m. every day, by day 5, he sits down to you next to you with his book or her book. And that's how children don't listen, they imitate.
Yeah.
But I think that's true in the corporate world with consumers as well. They gotta call you out if you show them a big poster of happiness and all smiles and inclusive society, and then your behavior, they can clearly tell that your terms of service and the way your CRM, your customer relationship management is handling it is
It doesn't
not
work.
the reality of what you say. Like the Dave Chappelle, I'm sorry, I have to go there. The Dave Chappelle sketches about McDonald's. He was joking, it was in the Chappelle Show season 1 or 2. He was making a fake commercial of what it is to work for McDonald's. And he was taking all that message of, oh, we're so inclusive and we value the community. But even the paycheck doesn't reflect that, that message
At all. And there are a lot of tech companies that are very much like that, right? What they put out there is, oh, we support the community. But then you see a newspaper article where, people have been suing that same company for discrimination or poor work environment. And I always say, believe those articles before you believe something that PR put out, right?
Yeah.
Like PR is going to put out the best. PR is going to, if they had to pay for a diversity award to participate in a diversity award, guess what? They're not that great at diversity.
Research to prove that their product is good for health, although it destroys it. Anything goes. And that's something I always tell my wife. She says, but why are you so cynical when you listen to PR or even political messaging, and I'm like, I worked the first 8 years of my career in Chinese factories in the early 2000s. So I saw the black box of the manufacturing world while I was seeing the press releases of the company making these products in China. And I was like,
Yep.
there is a front window and there is the warehouse. And when you get into the warehouse, you see how everything, it's like utopia in the front window, dystopia in the warehouse.
I was telling somebody this morning, I said, I have used this analogy for years, and I think that it is so true of most, I said tech, but I think a lot of companies fall into this bucket of they're sold, it's like the Wizard of Oz, right? Emerald City, this beautiful, gorgeous place with, gold paved roads and, follow the yellow brick road and da da da. And it's nothing but a little man behind a curtain riding a bicycle, right? Like it is just a facade, right? It's not what it really is. It is truly like this illusion that people build up, like they sell you this wonderful, great thing. And then when you get there and you see that it's just this little man on a bicycle that's barely holding on, right? Now your world has changed.
Yeah,
And
it's
they
like the
don't want you,
Matrix. It's like the
right. They don't
Matrix.
want
Oh, you
you to
mean this
know.
is all coming from babies?
Right. And so I always describe like a lot of my work experiences as coming out of Oz, right? Like what I was sold was not what was happening there. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think that, when you talk about diversity and inclusion and equity and accessibility kind of in these spaces, people need to be equipped to ask the right questions, right? Of, okay, what's really going on there? Because companies love to put out their recruiting numbers. Oh, we've increased, our number of underrepresented folks by X percent. Or, we've hired so many people from the LGBTQ plus community. Great. Who's going out the back door? Like, what are your attrition rates? What are your promotion rates? What are the challenges that people are running into, right? What's that block that's preventing them from getting to that next level? What support are you providing those that are from underrepresented or marginalized communities so that they will be successful in your organization, right? And so some of that could be, having ASL interpreters at every event or every program just because, not because someone requested it or because, you have to comply to X, Y, and Z, right? Why is that not the norm? And so it's thinking about how do you put the pressure on these organizations to do what they should be doing versus checking this compliance box.
This facade of a society. I keep telling my 16-year-old about it to try and be better about that, to be the change you want to see, because I'm starting to see it come down away from the corporate world into the private sphere. And by
Oh,
that,
yeah.
I mean Instagram. This new generation, the way they handle Instagram and TikTok, there is also now a front window warehouse side of real life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because the best creators are those who look authentic, but there is a difference between authentic and real,
Real. Mm-hmm.
which is, let's talk about our vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
That's what is still very much taboo, and why all these things come as an afterthought. Because to actually address a problem, you have to acknowledge it first. You have to acknowledge that something is wrong, that it's not perfect, it's not shiny. And that might be where it's difficult for brands and for people in general to just admit, yeah, I'm not doing that great. and not happy all the time. And the company is not perfect and is fucking up sometimes and trying to do better.
Yep. And I think if there were companies that, and I say this a lot, and this is coming from someone that's a marketer, right? If you would get the marketing out of the way so that the real can come out, that will be your best marketing.
Yeah.
Right? I always say, you could fire all of your recruiters. If you treat your people right, they will be your best recruiters. You won't even need to put funding into recruiting, because if people feel valued and seen and heard and they're thriving in your environment, they'll want other people to come there and be a part of that. And they'll invite their friends, right? Especially if they're the most marginalized, right? And so I wish that companies would get out of this, I want to sell you Oz mentality and say, I want to interview the little man behind the curtain, right? Like, how are you holding up? What are you doing? What can we do better, right? What support do you need? Because if they can show kind of behind the curtain and behind the scenes and not just what's pretty, then people, okay, now I see what I'm getting into. Now I don't feel as if I've been sold, some false narrative about who you are. That's when I think inclusion can really work, is when we stop trying to sugarcoat and make it something that it's not. But there's also a level of, as you said, vulnerability. That's a part of that, which leads to there's a level of courage, right? You have to overcome some fears in that.
On both sides, by the way.
On both sides. And that is okay. Like, that is truly okay. And like right before we jumped on this podcast, I was on a call where I was talking about this program that I'm about to do. And the instructor said, we have this thing where we talk about something bad that has happened and then we move on, right? It's like we talk about it and we're like, but now I'm here and this is what I've done. And I'm like, I need to stay in that moment a little bit longer. I need to milk that moment, because there's so many more people that are in that situation or have come from that situation or feel like that's kind of what they're sensing is happening. That's the authentic part, right? But there's a level of vulnerability that I have to bring forth in order to do that. And I'm okay with that, right? Because I'm at this point where I'm like, nobody could fire me. I work for myself, right? I'm good. I have nothing to hide in that space. And so I wish that more people would show that vulnerable side, including corporations need to show that vulnerable side in this work.
It takes someone fearless to admit to vulnerability.
Oh, yeah.
It's a paradox, but you're arrogant and, cocky while you're insecure. You show vulnerability once you've built the self-confidence to say, hey, the whole package means I can talk about this thing and it's okay. Which is why I like a lot now that there are more and more famous people who come out and say, I'm autistic, I have Asperger. It has to start from them. It makes it easier for so many people at other levels to come out. And the reason why I said it has to come both ways is because of two quick stories from personal experience. One in esports, actually, on an event with Amazon, which I have to say, on that particular event, behaved perfectly well. But because somebody cared to speak out, and it could have gone bad if everybody had shut up. So we had an esports event. To qualifiers, 8 finalists, fly them to Las Vegas, parking cars in front of the door, big stuff. In this 8 qualified finalists, one of them, Reggie Valenzuela, if you listen to us, He is paraplegic, and he can only play with his own hardware. You have to see it to even comprehend how he plays the game. But the point is, I knew of his story through the Facebook community because I was chiming in it for a year and a half for that company. And so I knew of him and of his story, although he didn't know of me. When I sent the 8 emails to the 8 finalists, he declined to come up without further explanation. But I insisted because of my daughter and my sensitivity to disability, and because I knew his backstory. So he got very lucky there that I asked him why. And he started saying, oh, I have a very severe disability, so traveling by plane is impossible to Las Vegas. Where are you? In San Diego. Can you make it by car? Yeah, but I would need 2 or 3 people to accompany me. My mom, no problem. We pay for this extra cost. It's $120 more. It's okay. It's within the range. Yeah, but I would need my bed on the floor. No problem. I'll tell the audio hotel to take care of it. I need to play on my wheelchair. I cannot sit on the seats that production will have. No problem, we'll accommodate. Let me talk to someone at Amazon. And when I went to Amazon and they said, this is the situation, they all said, yeah, of course, sure. But he was too shy. And when everything happened, and at 40 years of age, he told me, this is the biggest thing I've done in my life, and thank you for insisting. I asked him, but why did you decline? At first, before I insisted, why did you decline? And he said, I didn't want to be a burden for production because of my requirements. And I told him, dude, when I work with a YouTube star or a Twitcher, his requirements list is 5 times longer than you. And there is no logical reasoning or justification behind it. Sometimes they ask for a ping pong table in the room, in the hotel bedroom, just because. Or for Mariah Carey is known to ask for M&Ms, but it has to be the green ones.
Green ones, yep.
You know, and that's not because of a condition. So if you have a condition and your requirements list is this short, please ask.
Yeah.
If the person says no, then it's on the person. But if you didn't ask, then it's kind of on you. And I understand where this stems from, by the way. It comes from disabled people being fragile and more vulnerable, supposedly, as parents, society teaches us to overprotect them. And because kids imitate their parents' behavior, their parents didn't want to be a burden for friends and family. Now they don't want to be a burden for production or whatever comes up as opportunities in their life.
Yeah.
That was a very teachable moment for him, but also for me, I got to tell you.
Yeah.
Because I realized I should pay attention to why people say no to things and ask at least what it was all the time, even when
regardless.
I don't know their backstory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the other moment was in sports. This one I cannot name the athletes, but we offered a particular very famous athlete from the world of football to star in our sports video game alongside the athletes with disability. And I told him, this is an opportunity for you to talk about injury throughout a career, because most people don't know that you struggled with a severe knee injury since age 24, and that's why you lost your speed, and that you had thyroid your entire career, which is why you were overweight from times to times. And I got into a discussion because he said, I don't want to talk about it. And I told him, why though? Because this explains so much about people who have followed your career. They said, yeah, but I cannot show weakness. And depending on other people's decision, and he explained to me, this is even worse when I was an active player, because I want my coach to select me come Sunday. How do you expect him to select me if I tell him, oh, my knee hurts? Oh, I have thyroid, that's why I grow fat. No, I have to tell him, yes, boss, I'm gonna lose weight.
Yeah.
And that competitive environment, that tells me, all right, it's not just that the deciders don't want to listen, it's also, like you said earlier, the courage it takes to be a troublemaker
Yeah.
and to be the first one who speaks up.
Yeah. One of the videos that we use often in some of the facilitation is Gareth Thomas, the rugby player, when he decided to come out, right? And in the story, I believe it's a Guinness commercial, but just the turmoil that he had in coming out to his team and him thinking like there are 3 million people out here that want to be me and I want to be any one of them. Like I don't want to have to do this. And so the courage that he had to have, and again, this is a rugby player. This is one of the toughest sports out there, but that was nothing compared to the courage that he needed to have to even talk about him being gay to his team and his teammates and his coach. And we use that video, and every time that I hear it and I think about it, I think about it wasn't just the courage to come out then, but every single time he has to make the decision, or anyone that's in the LGBTQ plus community makes the decision to come out, there's so much courage that they need to sum up in order to do that. And so when I think about, the stories that you shared and, the ones that I think through, that's the hard part in all of this, right? Listening to and learning about and being aware of diversity and inclusion, that's the easy part. And so companies need to understand that they're doing the easy part. The hard part is making it so that courage isn't so hard to come by, right? People can talk about their disabilities. They can talk about their needs. They can talk about it in a way where they're not fearing judgment or being dismissed or not being called, next on the team, whatever it is. Those are the environments that we need to create. And that's what inclusion is about. And so I appreciate, hearing these stories and the process of being accommodating, right? So that the next time that player gets an invitation, he may speak up because, okay, it wasn't as difficult as I thought, but that's not the guarantee that everybody will be that accommodating, right? And so
Correct.
that's the piece that we really need to think through is how do we make this the norm so that people don't have to second guess or think through, everything that they're doing. I think I don't know if you and I were talking about this. All my conversations are starting to blend together, but I think that it was a conversation around a student in a wheelchair having to get across campus, and it took them what would typically take a student maybe 5-10 minutes to walk would take them 45 minutes to an hour because of the accessible walkways and pathways to parts of the campus. And a professor walked with that student through that process. And it took that able-bodied professor to say, this is not acceptable, right? We need to change this. Because that student was like, well, this is just how it is. This is the accommodation that they've given us. And the school has said, we've accommodated, right? We've checked the
And
box.
his courage was not placed into trying to change it. He was placing his courage on resiliency and saying, all right, cool. You want me to go through that path every day? I'm going to go through that path every day, which is another form of courage.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, doesn't bring change for the next ones to go on the path.
Right. And so I think, the beauty of that was partnering with somebody that had the privilege of being at a decision-making table to say, this needs to change, right? You're not going to have to fight this battle alone. I'm with you in this process. And I think that's the piece that, that we have to get into. It's like, I'm tired of awareness. Like, how do we move from awareness to action?
Yes,
Right.
that's something I say all the time. It's not about awareness. It's about acknowledging what was missing and fixing the past
And
for it.
fixing it. Yes.
No pedestals, platforms. But
Oh, I love
this
that.
goes
No
back
pedestal.
to
I love
this
that.
goes back to what you. This is not for me. I'm sorry to whoever I stole it from. It was a meeting. I didn't memorize the credits, but no pedestal print platforms is something that stayed with me. But this goes back to the warehouse and front window thing you were talking about earlier. And it goes back to it because it's about walking my shoes. And at Lixan, when I was in Hong Kong 15 years ago, most people will not remember Lixan. You can search it on Wikipedia if you want. It was much smaller than Amazon, Google, Facebook. So I have to I have to be reserved about the fact whether this idea can be scaled or not. We only did it with up to 35 people, which is very small compared to having thousands of employees. But we always saw it that the warehouse people had to ship between 500 parcels to 1,000 a day, and there were 12 of them. And then we had the customer support people. There were 5 of them dealing with 3,000 emails a day. And we were 4 at marketing, selling the stuff, pricing the stuff, blogging, doing the fun stuff, really. The fun stuff has consequences. If you enter the weight or the dimensions wrong of the product on the product page, somebody is having a hell of a day in the warehouse.
Yeah.
If you describe a feature wrong in your blog, customer support receives hundreds of emails, and we are in the wrong on that transaction, so we have to refund something.
Yeah.
And they staying over late hours because of it. To make sure that the marketing people knew that, their first 3 weeks were in customer support, the second 3 weeks were in the warehouse. Then you get to make the stuff, to do the fun stuff. First, you suffer the consequences of what I do wrong, and then you get to do things wrong with me. Because I want you to feel guilt when you slip, and I want you to go down and say, sorry, guys, I know I messed up your day today. And I want you to kind of overthink the little details. Yeah, I like my marketeers to be a bit fearless and big picture thinking at the moment of brainstorming.
Right.
When you execute, when you deliver, when you enter stuff in the system, that's precise things with consequences to your actions, and it's human suffering. Humans, not a robot, not an AI somewhere, not an algorithm. Not everything is done by algorithms. And even those algorithms are coded by people, which is why artificial stupidity comes along artificial intelligence.
Agreed. But yeah, I think that it's that walk in my shoes, right? There's a different level of respect when that happens and that occurs, and we don't do enough of that. And I think we are,
especially as companies.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
we
like,
try to specialize people way too young nowadays, way too young. Expert at a long title of 5 words. Just to describe your job takes 5 words. That tells me a level of specialization that I understand it. You might become really great at this thing, but what are the sessions that the company is doing to keep you? You know what was the scariest part in George Orwell's 1984 for me? What? It was not the screen spying on him. It was the fact that everybody was doing his job or her job in the book without knowing the purpose of the job and what the company was in fact even doing.
They were robots. Yeah.
That's I have to read that book again. Because we're getting there. I know some people who do their job really well, but if you ask them, but do you even know what the company is really doing? What's the purpose, the mission statement? No, I have no idea. I just encode my things and I do it really well. And that's it. I don't ask questions.
Yeah. And companies love that, right? We don't want you to ask questions. We don't pay you to think.
Maybe big corporations love that. As a startup entrepreneur.
Oh yeah, not as a startup.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's why I appreciated the time that I worked at a startup, right? Because it was I appreciate the scrappiness of it, even though I didn't appreciate the scrappiness of it at the time. I was like, we need some order. We need some processes.
We need some lunch. We need
Yeah,
some
we
lunch.
need something.
It's 4 p.m. Nobody has lunch.
But I realized that is exactly what you said. We wore so many hats and we had to appreciate so many different things that because like when I started at that company, I was one of 3 or 4 marketing folks that we did it all. Like all of it, right? The whole funnel. That was what we were responsible for. And then over time, we added folks to it, but and then we became a little bit more specialized, like in field marketing. But because we had done some digital or we had done some, other things and worked with customer support, we had an appreciation for what they did. And so now we had a common language to be able to explain and sit down and problem solve. And I think that that's part of what's happening now in these corporations. And I'm tying it back to DEI because it's the same thing. No one is having those conversations to problem solve. They're not even talking the same language.
I even told you once when we talked that, in my view, head of D&I is a strange title to begin with. Because if you really want to be more diverse and inclusive in the workforce, then your head of D&I should be the head of human resources. He or she should be in a position of power, not in a position of advising. And it's the same thing if you want your products to be more inclusive, then you have to think in focus groups and go out. It's almost like you want to have a head of empathy. If I want to make up a word, it's somebody who will first have an antenna on behalf of the company and then train the others from the inside to keep open-minded and curious. A friend of mine has a fake title, which is Chief of Curiosity. And I like that much more than head of diversity and inclusion, because one day it might be about ethnicity, another day it might be about disability, but then yet another day it might just be about just a new subject, a new scientific research that comes out. And that curiosity is I think the best way to define it, stay open to the outside world.
Yeah.
And with active listening.
Yeah, I did a webinar last month, like where should the head of diversity sit, right? Does it sit under HR? Does it sit with the CEO? And the last question that I threw out that I didn't even give anybody a chance to answer was, what would it look like if HR reported into the chief diversity officer, right? Because my perspective is it's more than just people and processes, right? It's who are your customers? How are you engaging in the community? All of these things and then it's a business imperative. It's not just about human resources, right? Which is very finite. It does impact other parts of the business, right? So in gaming, for example, that chief diversity officer will be asking, okay, what does accessibility look like in design, right? What's the user experience? How are they engaging, right? What modifications are we making to our products in order to make sure that people have access regardless of what their abilities are? And that's kind of where I am right now. It's like pushing that envelope.
I think there is the pressure, and being an economist, and it might sound weird for many people who know me, but deep down I'm an optimist. I believe we can make this world a better place, despite everything bad I see in it. And I don't think we can fix everything overnight or within 2 weeks, but I see a better future for my kids. I believe in pressure, but more importantly, I believe in incentives. For example, I don't think you end the cocaine trade in Colombia by just arresting the head of the cartel and a few of his people. You have to pay more for the kilogram of coffee and chocolate. And if, as a farmer, I can make more growing chocolate and coffee or banana than cocaine, that's a positive incentive for me to feed my family without doing that terrible thing you tell me not to do.
Yeah.
You gave me an alternative. And I think that's a very important argument, though, especially if anybody is listening to us, a little bit reluctant and still on the fence about whether it's worth it to invest in diversity and inclusion. It pays. If you do it right and your product is more accessible by more people, certainly you realize that what you were labeling as the disabled customer was actually a segment of all the other categories you were looking at, and that they are 15% of each demographic you want to cater to. So if you want to cater to the 18-year-old male, well, 15% of them are disabled. So can they even use your product? If they can, one example, the Microsoft Adaptive Controller was made because Satya Nadella, the CEO himself, has a child with disability. So he opened his eyes as a father, like it did for me. But on this intuition, they did it. And now it's exceeding sales forecast, I think, by 4 or 5 times. I hear the whispers. So it's that if you build it, they will come. That you think, oh, you might think, yeah, do it because it's the right thing to do. But then you know what? You're going to see profits and benefits from that.
It's
and
the
at
curve
the end
cut.
of the day, it's good for the bottom line. It's not a charity. It's an investment. You're going to recoup it. Your sales are going to go up.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. It's the curve cut. It's closed captioning. It's these things that
Absolutely.
they thought was very specific to one audience, but it just impacted so many other audiences, right? And so that's how companies need to think when they think about diversity and inclusion. It's who are we not hearing? Who are we not supporting? And how can this one tweak or modification of something we already do impact so many more people? And so it's not recreating the wheel. It's having some more voices and more experiences at the table so that you now have this diverse perspective of, okay, this is how we can change with this pen looks, how this pen operates, whatever it is. And so that's, why I think there's so much opportunity out there, but we have to get out of our own way of, okay, we're checking the box because we have to do this diversity and inclusion workshop. Right, we have to get beyond that.
Keeping it safe. I think that's often what leads to status quo. It's keeping it safe. Let's not risk winning more because we could lose something in the process. But the examples of inclusive design leading to eventually universal designs, the closed caption one you just said, we've seen it in video games. Originally, we thought as well, subtitles for the deaf and hearing impaired. But then you look at the data, and 32% of the audience uses the subtitle option if it's offered to them. That's way more than the percentage of deaf and hearing impaired. So it can be somebody on the bus, somebody learning a second language, or somebody who just likes to see accurately what the words are. It could be because the person was talking with a British accent or Australian accent, and it was difficult to catch what they were saying to begin with. There can be many reasons, but if you give the choice to people, they will use it. And an even brighter one that I say too much because I love it so much, the ramp. The ramp was created for wheelchair users. I intuitively was always using it if it was free. If my mind had a choice between stairs and ramp, intuitively I was using the ramp. And now the data comes out that it's better for the backbone of anyone, even able-bodied. So inclusive design leads to universal design. And that's what affects your bottom line positively. Sometimes way more than you forecasted it would, because we tend to forecast in increments. And sometimes when you discover a new market, it's that multiplier, that crazy curve, that hockey stick that we like to see so much in marketing. Maybe that's what we're addicted to in marketing.
Well, I mean, again, and it's like we always talk about, inclusion leads to innovation, but we don't talk about that path. And this is it, right? Like, this is that path. If you truly believe in inclusion and you're bringing forth the best in all of these perspectives and identities, that's when you're going to get that hockey stick. That's when you're going to get that inclusive, that universal design, because now you're thinking about things the way your competition's not thinking about it.
Yeah, right. And that's how you
Right.
beat them. Like in sports. Like in sports, if you think different, that's how you get a chance to win and get out of the rat race.
Yeah.
Steve Madden, in his documentary, had that way of fostering creativity from his designers. They say they design a prototype shoe. Who decides if it's good or not? It's not Steve Madden. Across the street from the office, we have a flagship store across the street. Make 5 prototype of the shoe. Put them on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
Sit there. Look at the customers. Interact with the shoe. What do they say? Even ask them questions if you want to, especially if they don't buy. And within 2 or 3 hours, either you sold the 5 shoes and you have something, or you didn't, and you better listen to the feedback of why you
Yep.
didn't. Go back and make another prototype. I loved that, but I think what we are toying with here is go a step further. Don't just go into the flagship store where you already have your profiled customer coming to you. Maybe go in the streets of that city where we don't have a store and
Yep.
sell them on the street and see what they say there.
Yep.
How does it fit their wallet? How does it fit their
A pop-up
everyday
store.
life?
Yeah.
How does it fit the geography of the
Yep.
street in which they
Right.
live?
Who, folks that are not your demographic at all.
Yeah.
Right. What would they say?
Go through them, go to them, and,
Mm-hmm.
and listen to them. By putting what you have, the product, the service, your values, whatever it is you sell, put the real thing in their hands, shut up and listen.
Listen.
And
Yes.
and
Yes. I
see
need to
them
put that on
say,
a t-shirt.
oh, fuck this shit.
Yes.
This shit doesn't work.
But that's the feedback, right? Because everyone wants the, like, the oh, this is great, this is wonderful, yada yada. And then if they hear a dissenting voice, okay, but that's just one voice. No, like, you need to hear a lot of those voices to tell you that your shit's not working. Right? Like, this is not, this ain't it. And that's when you start to rebuild and you grow and you learn. And so I absolutely love that idea, right? I think I'm going to put that on a t-shirt, right? Shut up and listen.
This starts to sound like Swimming with Sharks, one of the first Kevin Spacey movie. He was telling his intern, shut up, listen, and learn.
But that's what we need to be telling folks in this space.
Intern who should tell that to the boss. No,
Yes.
shut up, listen, and learn. I'm going to tell you how it is in the streets.
Exactly. And that's what I think a lot of these folks that are marginalized within these corporations need to say. Like, they can't say, but that's what they need to say. It's like, shut up, listen to what we're saying, learn from this, fix it, and then move on.
And repeat our message if you want to talk about it. Because I still am a firm believer, and we've hinted at that earlier, allyship and a white, able-bodied cis male like me still should not be neutral. And obviously we cannot speak for others, but if we listen and repeat the message, it's still important because we might have access to certain boardrooms, certain cameras. And so until the people who actually can speak from a first-hand experience get in front of that boardroom or that camera or that area of power, if you're the one in that room, at least don't be the one who shuts up and report what you heard. And don't always feel guilty about, did I do it right? Did I do it perfect? No, you probably didn't do it perfectly. But
right.
At least
but you did
tried
it.
to be on the right side of history, and you didn't just nod and vote yes on the agenda of the day.
Yeah. And
Because
that's,
as an ally, you can still do things. And you hinted that with a couple of stories earlier.
yeah,
That, for example, the professor who worked with
the
the
student.
disabled,
Yeah.
he's a professor. So he has more power and authority than the disabled student. Him taking the 45 minutes to take that road makes a difference. And he's a good
Yeah.
ally by doing that.
Yeah. And I think, when I do leadership work or if I'm talking, facilitating, what have you, that's why I always say, let's go from awareness to action. You can read all the books you want to. What are you going to do with this information and the knowledge? And so, how do you use that privilege that you have honorably? How do you lend your voice when those voices aren't at the table, right? How do you challenge the status quo? How do you push back when you see, okay, this isn't going to benefit this group of people, right? And that's what I think, particularly cis white males can do in this space. It's going from not just saying I'm an ally to actually doing something that's going to shift the status quo, that's going
Yeah.
to challenge other cis white men in that space to think about it in a very different way. And I think the comfort comes in when there's a level of familiarity, right? Because I always hear, oh, well, he's an ally or a champion around gender issues because he has a wife, a sister, a daughter, right? It's close proximity. It's something that's very personal, right? He may be an ally possibly in the LGBTQ plus community because somebody in his family or even himself might be a part of that community. It's a little bit more difficult when it comes to race and a little bit more difficult when it comes to disability because one, you have invisible and invisible disabilities. And so folks may not even know that someone has it. So they don't even think about those invisible disabilities. They only think about, being deaf or blind or having some type of physical ailment, right?
Missing a limb, being
Right.
in a wheelchair, the classics.
Exactly. They don't think about, learning disabilities or any other type of disability that's out there. And so people, especially leaders, are uncomfortable when they just don't know or they're not familiar, or they don't have someone in their personal space that they can say, oh, it's personal connection to me. And so I always say that that's okay. You don't have to have someone in your personal circle in order for you to care.
Correct.
Like if you care about people, you should care about these things too. And so that's what I try to coach folks on is how do you get past that discomfort? Like what is that challenge for you? And it may be something that came up in their background, right? They were raised to think that a certain group was inferior or that this group was weak or what have you. And so they are battling within themselves on, do I speak up or not? Because I kind of still believe this, even though I know and have seen things that are contradictory to that. So yeah, I think there's just a lot that can be
It
done.
comes back to what we were saying earlier, though, about the courage, the insecurity, and the
Courage.
confidence.
Yeah.
But the insecurity and the confidence more so. When I was younger and I had more to prove to my parents, myself, society, everything you have to prove when you're young, it was much harder than it is now for me to admit that I had been wrong about something my entire life.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter if it's about race or disability, it's just, or even the way you say a word or write a word. When you find out that for 43 years or 25 years or whatever, you've been doing something wrong, it takes quite a bit of confidence in yourself to say,
Yeah.
I was dumb. Got to change that. Oh, I'm sorry. And with something that deep as racial perception or economic perception of the poor, and especially if it carries the emotional baggage of having transmitted to you by somebody you respected, be it
Yep.
your mom, your dad, a professor figure, Or just in yesterday's, one of my role models is Dave Chappelle. Every now and then, he might have one line in his specials, and yesterday's was no exception, where I disagree with him.
Mm.
But when I was younger, that would have been difficult for me to disagree so strongly with a line of one of my heroes. Nowadays, it's just, yeah, he's a human being, he's not me.
Right.
He's not gonna always exactly, sometimes he's gonna offend me, not always the people I want him to offend.
Right. Right.
And I should take it with grace. I should be graceful
Great.
about it. And
Yeah.
but I was not capable of that so much when I was 24, 25, and had so much to prove to myself. So if you had challenged me into saying, well, what your mom taught you when you were 7 and you have been doing for 18 years is wrong, I would have probably come at you from a position of defense, of saying, yeah, but I'm doing this because of this, and haven't you seen that? And this small anecdotal example that is not backed up by data in any way, shape, or form, but that I've lived once when I was 14 is the reason why. I would have justified my behavior. And I find it's not just about racial tensions. It's even the young guy who starts his job and his boss tell him, can you do it a little bit more green? And he says, oh, but I did it red because of this and that. And then you get a long 15 minutes explanation. And you're like, I just wanted a little bit more green. I don't want a shrink session with you. But that comes with age. And
it's maturity. Yeah.
Yes,
it comes with
correct.
maturity. It comes with, and one of the things that I do a lot with my coaching clients is, who are you? Like, do you even know who you are? Because we are, like you said, a culmination of all of these other people, right, that have told us and influenced us. But that doesn't mean the you of today needs to hold on to all of that. There's some parts of it you want to hold on to, but there are other parts of it that don't serve you well. And so how do you shed those things without shedding the people, right? Like you said, you love Dave Chappelle. Just because he said one thing doesn't mean that you're going to totally dismiss him, right? And so it's understanding how to pick and choose what serves you well. And so what are your values, and what are the things that are important to you, and what is your purpose, right, in this life?
That's a great question, because it's much easier to make day-to-day short-term decisions about issues and problems and moments if you have taken the time to decide who you are and what are your values. And I love that, because I do the same exercise with brands and mobile games and companies sometimes. Tell them, so right now you're getting into tactics and even a little bit about strategy, but you haven't told me yet who you are as a brand, because that defines who your best payer is likely to be, who is your ally, who is going to be gung-ho and obsessed about your brand, who is easy to win, and maybe that's where we go first, and who do we have to convince, and who will resist. But you have to define, who do you want to be as a brand? And that's the same as building a persona. What do you do? What do you don't do? And it's so funny that sometimes you have 3 founders who think they know they are aligned. That's the company we have. But when you make them verbalize it, they look at each other like, what? That's the company you want to build? That's not what I'm building.
Not what we talk about. Yeah. And that's why I do a lot of, like, I think I posted about it this morning on LinkedIn. It's so many of these companies are going into like this diversity and inclusion thing without a foundation. Like, are we even defining diversity and inclusion the same? Like, do you even know common words and language? Because we're coming in doing all these, let's talk and let's build relationship, and we're not even talking the same language. It is unbelievable to me, that I'm stopping. Yesterday we were in a session and someone said something about, if a man is a cross dresser, I don't want him to be a, I don't want his transgenderedness to be something. And he was just like blending all of these terms together, because in his mind it was one and the same. And I was like, okay, let's step back and let's talk about, because I was like, there's a whole lot to unpack in what you just said. So let's step back and let's talk about sexual expression, sexual orientation. Let's talk about gender, right? And so broke down each of those. And I'm like, now let's address what's your question and what's the issue, right? And so with that language, with that new language, he realized, okay, I was mixing all of these things up in my head and had created this story of, I don't know what it is and I don't like it, so I don't want to be a part of it, right? So he was like, I don't believe in gender neutral bathrooms. Like, I just don't think that it's a thing that should happen. And I'm like, so what gender is the bathroom in your house? And he thought about it and he was like, well, right. So I was like, your bathrooms at home are gender neutral, right? So let's think about it.
It's all that cultural conditioning. A
Yeah,
lot of learning is unlearning in life.
it's unlearning, but it's also
Unlearning the bad habits.
building a foundation, right? And a knowledge base that's not just based on assumption or what you heard here and there and pieced together to be a reality, right? And so I'm noticing that a lot of the work that I'm doing now is just this basic foundation stuff that corporations are skipping over because they're like, oh yeah, we want to say we had this inclusive conversation. You can't even have a conversation if y'all aren't speaking the same language. If this person's over here speaking Russian and this person over here speaking Farsi,
we are fighting against ignorance, and so many problems come from ignorance. Even sometimes somebody will tell me, oh, that person is racist. I'll tell them, no, he or she is just ignorant.
right?
And he's just repeating stuff he's heard, but he has absolutely no direct experience of what he's talking about. It's just TV headlines and nothing else. But it doesn't mean he or she has a good or bad heart or is stupid. I always tell my wife, there is zero shame, zero guilt in being ignorant. Because right this minute, we are all ignorant about so many things.
Yep.
I will, however, start to become impatient and frustrated with someone is if after being explained once or twice, he perseveres into the wrong direction, because that's no longer ignorance. That's being dumb.
Yeah.
The knowledge has now been shared with you, and you decided to willfully discard it.
Right. That's willful ignorance. Yeah.
Proof. So that's on you. But to be ignorant today, oh my God, you live, you learn. And so there's zero shame into, going to a colleague or a friend and telling him or her, look, I've seen this on TV, I feel uncomfortable, but I know you've been through a sex transition and you're the closest friend I have who I can, admit my ignorance and tell you, what does that mean? What are you talking about? Because it happens sometimes in the media that a word starts picking up, a buzzword starts coming up and up and up and up. And by months 2 or 3, we are all using it wrong.
That's what's happening right now with critical race theory, right? Critical race theory is such a buzzword, like phrase, and we don't want that taught in school. It's not taught in schools. Like, I have yet to see a school system that says, yes, we're teaching. No school system is teaching critical race theory, right? It is a theory that is taught in law school of how to look at laws and to make sure that, you're looking at it critically when race or other underrepresented or diverse aspects of it are or could be potentially visible, right? Or part of it. This whole notion of it happening in schools is that ignorance, right?
Yeah.
It's just that.
A
It,
rumor in the village started, and
and
because
you grasp onto it
let's
and
not blame social media too much. Before there was social media, there were other ways to spread rumors and
yeah,
misinformation,
yeah.
and eh, be it the KGB or in your high school, anyone out there. Remember the gossip and
Oh yeah.
this one is this one is that. We human beings are we somehow are
Love
much better at
gossip.
spreading the misinformation than at finding scientific truth.
Yes.
Because that takes
Very
much
much
more
so.
time.
Very much so. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's just so much that, I mean, we could talk for hours on this, but there's just
Yes.
so much that needs to be unpacked and uncovered, and it all kind of boils down to what we're saying is like education, information, um, access, right? Opportunity. There was another word that you used earlier, representation,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
because representation gives. This is Matt Scott, one of our athletes, basketball Paralympic. He just won gold again at the last Paralympic. And when he accepted to be involved in the game, he said, "This is very important to me because when I grew up, I had no role model, and I want now to be the role model for the next generation." He said, "I grew up as a black man in a wheelchair, and I wanted to be a basketball professional. And I could see a lot of black men playing basketball, but none of them in a wheelchair. And so I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what the path was to my dream. I had the dream, but I couldn't accept the dream as a goal because there was no path, there was no role model. And now that I'm living and getting paid every month from playing basketball, I want other black kids or white kids in a wheelchair out there to know it's
Right.
possible. It's a career. Some people
Yeah.
make a living out of it. And I think that's the important part of representation. If it already exists, it needs to be part of our zeitgeist, of our pop culture, because pop culture plays a big, huge part in our education, not just parents and teachers.
Yeah.
And
Totally
I
agree.
think the right conclusion, because you're running out of time, what you said here, we could talk about this for hours. I think we must be doing this work for years and decades. And my message to corporations, startups, leaders, whoever you are, it's actually not a meeting or an agenda or a plan or brainstorming, diversity and inclusion, or however you want to call it. It's what Aristotle said. If we are what we repeatedly do, excellence thus is not an act, but a habit. And so it's just a change of mindset. It's continuously fixing the problem a little bit more. And it's not one
Yeah.
problem, it's a diversity of problems. And the more you fix, the better you are as a company and the more you will thrive.
Yeah. Totally agree. Totally agree. This is not any of the phrase is like it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Like
Yeah.
it's not even a marathon. Like it's
It's
unending.
life. It's
It's
a
life.
life.
It's infinity. It is infinity and beyond, right? Buzz Lightyear.
It's evolution. It's the
Yes.
process of evolution. It started with a Big Bang, and I'm sorry if I offend any religious beliefs out there, but I believe that it started with the Big Bang, and then from a cell, and it's evolution, and it
It
gets.
continues to
And when I
evolve.
look at it this way, I feel like it's getting evolution is a process of always being more sophisticated and nuanced and subtle and more advanced. It's never a process of simplification.
Never.
Otherwise, during the Big Bang, the antimatter would have won against matter. It didn't. So the evolution is sophistication and more nuance and learning more and more curious. It is not simplification in two bullet points that we can shove down everybody's throat in the mainstream. That's not
No.
how things work.
No. And it needs to be part of the company DNA. It is not a
Yes.
separate entity. It is a part of who that company is, part of their culture, part of what they live and breathe. It should be part of their mission. It should be part of their vision statement. Like all of that is where we're striving to get to.
And actually, that is as well, I'm learning in video game development that the earlier you embrace the guidelines of accessibility and inclusive design, the cheaper and easier it is to
Easy.
implement because it's done holistically. If you do the game first and then think, all right, how can we make it accessible now? Now, sorry, the designer has already made some decisions that have been programmed, and
Yep.
that changing them now means going back to the drawing board, which was
It's not
done
cost
12
effective.
months ago. You need
Yeah.
a time machine to make something sometimes accessible after the fact. If you
Yep.
think about it from the ground up, it's actually not that hard. Much easier than I thought before embracing it. I gotta admit,
Yeah.
with shame again.
That's all right. Learning and growing, evolving.
Thank you so much for your time today, Sacha.
Thank you
Always
so
a wonderful
much.
conversation.
Yes.
And have a great rest of your day. For everyone at home, if you want to pay for our next coffee, Big Karma, patreon.com/Big Karma. And may karma be with you, Sacha.
Thank you. Same to you.